There's a battle brewing in state legislatures and in Washington to force big oil to pay for their fair share of the damage that they're causing to our environment as we all face the consequences of climate change. That's the topic today on our podcast, where we focus on the major issues that are facing America with just a little lean to the left. Now, as we record this on the eve of the first presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump, he who has been convicted of I don't know how many felonies. Our guest is Jamie Henn, founder and executive director of Fossil Free Media, which provides campaign and communication support for the movement to break free from fossil fuels. Fossil Free Media is home to campaigns like Creative Media's, which pressures PR and ad agencies to cut ties with fossil fuel companies, and Make Polluters Pay, which is building public support for holding big oil financially accountable for their impact on our climate. So, Jamie, welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast. We got a hell of a lot to talk about today, my friend.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Fossil Free Media and what you guys do.
Sure. So Fossil Free Media has been around for about 3 years. And as you said, we work with groups across the climate and environmental movement, from small grassroots groups who are fighting oil pipelines in their backyard to national environmental groups that your listeners will have heard of, like the Sierra Club and Natural Resources Defense Council.
Right.
And our job is to kind of step in and bring to bear all the creative tools that we can from a communications perspective. So that includes making videos, putting on protests, sending out press releases, and then running these campaigns where we feel like there's a real opportunity to change the conversation around a particular topic.
Oh, great. So you guys make videos, so why don't I just have you make my video and I can just...
There you go.
All right. About 3 years ago, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, the Maryland Democrat, introduced a bill that would require the biggest polluters, like oil companies, to pay into a Polluters Pay climate fund to be used to finance efforts to tackle climate change. Whatever happened to that bill, Jamie? Do you know?
It's a good question. So, as you said, Senator Van Hollen introduced this idea of a climate superfund that was based off of existing superfund law, that, as people know, makes chemical companies or other big polluters pay for the pollution that they're putting into our environment and the cleanup costs of that.
Right.
So this bill was the same principle, which is if you make a mess, you've got to pay to clean it up. And in this case, the oil industry has been dumping carbon dioxide and methane into our atmosphere for decades. They knew all along the damage that this would cause. And so finally, folks are beginning to move to try and say, you've got to pay your fair share for the damage being done. What happened with the bill is that Senator Van Hollen floated this idea when we were in the midst of negotiating the Inflation Reduction Act, or Build Back Better at the time, and it did not make the final cut. I'll give you a few guesses why. They all begin with the words Joe Manchin. Senator Manchin wasn't too big a fan of asking polluters to pay their fair share, knowing that they were some of his biggest political contributors. We'll remember that Senator Manchin himself is a owner of a coal mining company in West Virginia. And so, the idea was popular and got a good amount of attention, but wasn't able to make it into the final draft. So fast forward, it's been on the table. Congress hasn't been amenable to passing progressive policy of late, especially when the House switched over. But I think that after last summer of climate impacts, and this summer, what we're already seeing with the cost that extreme heat is having across our country over the last few weeks, and the terrible hurricane season that we're looking at later this summer and into the fall, this idea has come back to the fore of saying, hey, if we're going to pay billions, trillions of dollars to deal with climate impacts, maybe polluters should have to pay their fair share.
Do you really think that the weather that we're experiencing will really make much of a difference? I mean, these guys, they just say, oh, it's just normal. Trump says that it's just part of, nature.
I
Huh?
don't have too much faith that Trump is going to come around on this one, especially when he's going off to ask the oil companies for $1 billion for his campaign.
Yeah,
Um,
nothing like asking for bribes, right?
exactly. But what I will say is that this is an interesting issue that cuts across some partisan lines
Hmm.
for kind of two reasons. And we've done polling on this, I should say, where upwards of over 70% of Republicans support the idea of big oil paying some share, some part of the damages being done by climate.
No
And there's kind of
kidding. I
two,
didn't know that.
there's sort of
You mean Republican, regular Republican people,
regular rank and
not
file Republicans.
politicians. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
not the politicians
Yeah,
who are
yeah, yeah.
on
And
the
probably
take
not
from
the
the
MAGA
industry.
people.
But I'll say two things. One
Yeah.
is that there's a basic principle of fairness here and law
Right.
and order, which is if you're knowingly causing damage, you should be held accountable. So
Right.
that's kind of core Republican value.
Okay.
And second, Republicans don't tend to like tax increases.
That's
And
true.
let's face it, if you live in the Hudson Valley of New York, or if you live down in Louisiana on the coast, or in Florida per se, where we know Governor DeSantis is, you're paying all sorts of costs to deal with
Hmm.
climate. People have lost their home insurance, cities and towns are having to pay to rebuild their bridges year after year. That money doesn't grow on trees. It comes out of existing funds that could go to be schools or healthcare, or it comes out of tax increases.
Right.
And so I think there are a lot of Republicans who realize, look, even if I don't fully believe in global warming, something's happening, and
Right.
these extreme weather events are getting more costly. And why not ask the richest corporations on the planet to pay in to help cover some of the damage that they're causing? So this one's kind of tricky, I think, for Republicans, which makes it a good political issue as well, because I think it actually puts the other side a bit on the defensive
Hmm.
in terms of talking about, who's going to be held accountable for the damage being done.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, you brought up the fact that that Trump has asked the oil companies, the big oil companies, for $1 billion for his reelection campaign, promising that once he's in office, he'd tear up Biden's environmental regulations and prevent any new ones from being implemented. I mean, that's just to me, it's just smacks of bribery. I mean, the guy is saying, "Give me your money and I will do for you what it is you want, and that's it." Right?
That's exactly right. I mean, look, Trump promised those guys that he'd be a dictator on day one,
Uh-huh.
so that we could drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, right.
He also promised that all of these investigations into big oil price fixing and price gouging would go away.
Right.
Um, this I think has been one of the greatest cons on the American people over the last 2 years. A lot of
Hmm.
people blame Joe Biden for gas prices as if he's the one going and drilling it out of the ground and selling it on the market. When we have specific evidence now that U.S. oil companies were colluding with OPEC to restrict supply, to drive up prices, to screw
Hmm.
Americans at the pump. And that
Hmm.
doesn't even just hurt us at the pump, that drives up the cost of everything.
Right.
Analysts have looked and experts have said that a full quarter of inflation, so what you're paying at the grocery store, can be traced back directly to oil, which makes sense. I mean, the industry always brags about how oil is in everything. Well,
Sure.
when you drive up the price of everything goes up.
Yep.
And so, here we have a major presidential candidate who basically says these companies may have just robbed the American people blind, but if they give me $1 billion, I'll let
Yeah.
them go ahead and do more of it down the road.
That's right.
Meanwhile, I think the Biden administration has actually been doing more than they kind of take credit for,
Hmm.
uh, in terms of having the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice begin to really investigate these guys,
Okay.
and try and push them on evidence of price fixing and hold them accountable. I wish that the president would be a bit more vocal about that, because I think
Yeah.
there's a strong record to run on.
Yeah.
But the American people need to know what's been going on, and need that public education to happen from the bully pulpit, as well as everywhere else.
That's really true. And especially given the fact that the Republicans are cooking up this thing called Project 25, which is a plan for the first 180 days of an incoming Republican administration, they hope. It includes a plan to dismantle federal agencies and public health standards, including environmental protections. And the Sierra Club, which you mentioned a minute ago, warns that this would be a death sentence for federal climate and environmental protection. What's your thought of what are your views about Project 25 and what they're trying to cook up?
Yeah, well, if you like drinking water without toxic chemicals in it or breathing air without carcinogens,
Uh,
then you won't be
yeah.
a fan of this document. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, Project 2025 is the most radical right-wing attack on our government across the board, but particularly since we're talking about the environment, on the environment, that we've ever seen. We used to have a Republican Party that, despite some disagreements about going after corporations,
Right.
broadly speaking, was supportive of conservation efforts in the
Right.
environment. Let's not forget that it was Richard Nixon that created the EPA.
Yeah,
Now,
that's an amazing thing to recall, actually.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
now we've seen just a total reversal. I mean, a total corporate takeover by,
Right.
the oil industry, by far right kind of anti-government zealots.
Hmm.
So Project 2025 would dismantle the very protections that I think Americans now take for granted. We forget that the skies above Los Angeles used to be filled with smog, or that you couldn't rely on the drinking water in your tap being
Right.
safe to drink. Those
Right.
things are only there not because the environment has magically gotten cleaner, but because there are protections put in place and
Yeah.
corporations have been held responsible for dumping chemicals or whatever it may be. And so all of that is at stake, let alone the progress that we've been making on climate with the Inflation Reduction Act and the investments being made. Again, if you like the idea that you can get a tax credit to buy an electric vehicle, or that you could save money doing energy efficiency, that all goes away. That
Yeah.
all gets struck. So the progress that we're making in this country in terms of saving people money on their electric bills, creating jobs in the clean energy economy, keeping our environment clean and protecting it for future generations, all of that is on the line this election, and we couldn't be facing a more kind of dire consequences if things go the wrong way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was reading the other day, I don't know if it was the Washington Post or the Baltimore Sun, but one of the two, that soon you'll be able to swim in the Potomac River and in the Inner Harbor in
Mm.
Baltimore. Now, those two bodies of water have been horribly polluted for decades. And the thought of putting even your foot in either one of them was a scary thing indeed. Uh, that's just a testament, I think, to the progress that's being made. And, if people want that to happen, vote for Trump and the Republicans.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I grew up in Boston,
Yeah.
there on the Charles River, and we used to joke you would go in with two arms and come out with three. And so, but again, the
Or
Charles
or
has
you
gone
can walk
through.
on water, right?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, we still sing "Dirty Water," Boston, you're my home at the Celtics games. Uh, and
Okay.
but that's really changed. I mean, we've made incredible progress. And I think
Yeah.
we have that opportunity on climate. I mean, climate is such an existential and enormous challenge, but we need to take heart from the idea that our country has been able to do extraordinary things to clean up our environment. And lo and behold, it's made our economy stronger and improved our quality of living across the board. We're just beginning to tip into that on
Yeah.
climate. I mean, the
Yeah.
money that was unleashed by the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure plan, that money's just beginning to hit
Yep.
communities. We're just beginning to see the electric vehicle charging stations and grants and all of that, grants for farmers, grants for forestry,
Yep.
everything beginning to come into play. And so to pull the rug out from under that, just
Yep.
as we're beginning to basically see a new chapter of our country where we can really make our air and water and climate safer. Would be just such a tragedy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's needless to say, as I think people listening to this know, a lot is on the line. We can't just assume that progress will continue if Trump is elected. I think there's a lot of damage that can be done. The transition will continue, but
Hmm.
it needs to continue at such a scale and speed that this election could really be a disaster.
You know, we don't have time to talk about all the things that President Biden has done with respect to the environment, but some of them include leading an LNG export pause. He's made bold environmental justice commitments that include EPA standards to cut greenhouse gas emissions, toxic air pollution, water pollution, and contamination from power plants. He's unleashed a boom in solar, wind, battery storage, and other clean energy technologies to support clean energy, even to the point that I bought a new electric vehicle a couple of months ago. I wouldn't have done it if it wouldn't have been for what President Biden has done and what he's trying to do. And I got to say, my Mustang Mach E is a fabulous automobile. I just love it. I am concerned about the ability to. I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and we don't have a lot of charging stations around here. I'm not sure why that is. It's a Republican area, so maybe that's why. But anyway, we don't. But I charge it at home, and it works just fine. Now, Trump has promised to undo all of this, saying that, among other things, that windmills kill birds. So, what do you got to say about that?
Well, look, I think you brought up a number of good points. I mean, one is that, look, I say this as a activist, a climate activist who's, knows the stakes and we've got to fight really hard. And so, I've spent the last 3 years pushing the Biden administration. We've organized protests outside the White House. We've
Uh-huh.
pushed them on, I think, some of the bad decisions they made to allow, the Willow Project to go forward in Alaska or the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen them begin to really turn a corner. You mentioned
Yep.
this new pause on liquefied natural gas exports.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is really the new frontier for the industry. I mean,
Okay.
they want to be shipping US oil and gas around the world, pollution be damned. Even though exporting, I mean, this is simple supply and demand. Exporting all that gas will simply drive up prices for consumers here at home.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but, President Biden did the right thing on that. And that was
Yeah.
a real reversal of previous policy. So I think we've got to give credit where credit is due. To your point about Trump and his outlandish views about wind turbines and also your efficient washing machine and everything else that he likes to
Oh
ramble.
yeah, toilets that you have to flush 3 times.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
It's always a little
yeah.
bit difficult. It's funny when Trump goes off the deep end. I mean, he's always going off the deep end, but one of his favorite riffs seems to be about home appliances.
Uh-huh.
Which is ironic for a man who I can't really imagine has ever done the dishes himself. But look, this is all propaganda. I mean, this is all ridiculous. Just to take the wind turbines one,
Yeah.
household cats, I'm afraid to say, are the number one killer of birds in this country, and it is on an order of hundreds of times the amount that are ever killed windmills. So if you see someone walking around, telling you windmills kill birds, recruit them for the anti-cat campaign first. That's the place to
Well,
start.
just let me ask you this. Do you really think that Trump gives a crap about birds?
No, of course not. I mean, that's the thing. I don't think any
I
of these,
don't
I mean,
care.
there were, look, you're there on the coast. I mean, there were proposals up, I live in the Northeast, proposals to build offshore wind.
Yeah,
This, again, would have reduced prices for consumers. These wind turbines are way off in the ocean. You don't even see them from the shore,
right.
create tons of jobs for workers, bring billions of dollars to our port communities like Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or down in Boston. And they started getting stopped
Yeah,
because these oil industry front groups suddenly did this whole Save the Whales campaign where they
yeah,
made up this lie that whales were hitting wind turbines.
yeah,
There was no evidence of this, of course,
yeah,
it was actually fishing boats and whatever else.
yeah,
If anything, a few more whales were dying because we cleaned up the ocean. So
yeah.
more whales were coming back. So inevitably a few more were dying.
Mm.
But again, as if the oil industry or Republican Party is suddenly a big save the whales fanatic.
Right.
This is just a ploy to put disinformation on Facebook and try and convince enough people who are just glancing at it that something here is happening. That's something we've got to watch out for.
Yeah, well, there's a lot
And
of
see a lot of
disinformation
that
going
fun.
on. There's a lot of disinformation going on because, as I said, I purchased an EV. I also, on my house, have added solar. I did this the last 3 or 4 months. So at the same time of the car, I did the solar on my house, and I feel like the the benefit for that is because of work that Biden's done. Um, when I purchased my car, I got $7,500 back
Yeah.
from the feds. $7,500 from the feds to buy an EV car that's just beautiful. I couldn't believe it, but it actually happened. I got the check and I cashed it, and I'm using it to pay the car off. So anyhow, I don't know why I got off onto that little tangent, but uh, I did. So besides the effort to make polluters pay that was in the Van Hollen bill, there's stuff going on in the states, right? I mean, Vermont and New York, they're both working on legislation to make polluters pay, right?
That's exactly right. And actually, this spring, at the end of April, Vermont made history. They
Yeah.
became the first state in our country and actually the first government around the world to pass legislation that would make big oil companies pay into a fund that will help the state deal with the impacts of climate change. And so Vermont right now is going to do an assessment where they're going to look at, they picked an established period starting in 1990, when oil companies very clearly knew the damage they were doing. They're going to calculate the total amount of emissions that happened during that period, break it up by the biggest polluters, so companies like Exxon, Saudi Aramco, etc., and
Hmm.
then basically send them a bill and have them pay into a fund, just like Superfund, that
Hmm.
would be administered by the state. And that money could then go to everything from repairing roads and bridges to installing air conditioning in schools so that kids aren't, at risk of extreme heat, to strengthening our healthcare system so that it can respond when climate impacts happen, setting up funds to help workers who are out of work because the ski industry is collapsing or whatever the case may be. And so it's a way, again, to say this problem was created knowingly by these companies.
Sure.
Vermont is going to already pay a huge amount of money. I mean, let's be clear, big oil companies will still be paying a fraction of the damage that they've done, but at the very least, they're beginning to start paying into a fund. So Vermont passed it, which I think to everybody's surprise, little
Right.
Vermont leading the revolution.
Yeah.
The oil industry doesn't have much influence in Vermont. There's far more cows than oil rigs up there.
Right.
Uh, and so now the question is, can we get a big state to follow Vermont's lead? So New York is next up. This
Hmm.
bill in New York has passed both the Senate and the Assembly.
Right.
It had huge levels of support across the state. It had labor on board, environmental justice groups, progressive groups, environmental groups,
Hmm.
housing rights activists, healthcare workers. Um, and now it's on Governor Hochul's desk. And so the governor has to decide whose side is she on? Does she want New Yorkers to keep having to pay the bill for these disasters, or is she willing to hold big oil accountable? So there's going to be a real pressure on the governor. She has until the end of the year to make a decision, but we're hoping she moves quickly and signs this bill this summer and really gets this done in New York. After New York, as you mentioned, more states. So there's a bill in California, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota. I think, look, South Carolina should have one. Every state should have one. I mean, every state's paying right now. And if your state isn't thinking about how to hold the industry accountable, then the bill is going to be coming due and it's going to come out of our tax dollars instead.
Yep. Governor Hochul. I mean, I'm just wondering, she's a Democrat. Why would there be any question about what she's going to do?
That is a great question. I mean, one would think she would jump all over this,
You
especially
would.
and with all of the support
Hmm.
among Democrats and again, as I said, across partisan lines in the
Yeah.
state of New York. A couple reasons. One, I think she does have donors from the oil and gas industry, and so one might worry that they're whispering in her ear about this.
Oh.
And second, we talked about disinformation on clean energy. Well, the oil industry is trying the same thing on this. Their
Hmm.
argument is, well, if you ask us to pay, then those costs will just be passed along to consumers. Your prices will go up at the pump. That's not the way the market works. ExxonMobil can't call up gas stations in New York and say jack up the price $1 because the governor dinged us with a fine. Oil is an international market. the way they do that is they constrict supply, but then that drives up the price around the world. That's also illegal, let's be clear.
Right.
And so there really isn't a way for these companies to kind of go after Vermont or New York or a couple states just because the states are trying to hold them accountable. Um, so again, this is about saving New Yorkers
Right.
money. Right now, the state's already paying billions for climate. Again, that's money that could be going towards other things. And the
Hmm.
goal here is to try and offset that cost by asking these polluters to pay their fair share.
Okay. Now, with respect to electric vehicles, including the investment in a national EV charging network, which was included in uh, tell me out here, the bill
The
that was in.
Inflation Reduction Act,
Yeah, the Inflation
awfully
Reduction.
named, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right, 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 right. What would happen to that if Trump would win the presidency?
Well, again, I think Trump is trying to take away all the incentives for electric vehicles.
Hmm.
He sees them as, I forget the exact quote, but as sort of a war on the American auto industry.
Yeah,
Needless to say, American auto companies have fully embraced this.
yeah,
You mentioned your Ford. Well, Ford has gone all in
yeah, they have.
producing EVs
Yeah,
because they know that that's where the future is, and that's how
yeah,
we stay competitive
yeah,
with China, with other countries who are
yeah,
really investing in this. And so, again, it's important to note Trump's actions on this. He'll do everything he can to stop electric vehicles. That hurts consumers, takes away your tax credits, keeps you addicted to expensive gas, happens to be his political donors. It hurts Detroit because the auto companies have invested a ton of money in moving to electric vehicles. And if the government starts pushing back against that, it just costs them money and slows it down for them. And it hurts workers who, again, are seeing new factories, new jobs, new industries, new automobile companies like Rivian or others starting up.
yeah.
Rivian stock just jumped hugely because VW invested a bunch of money into them. Again, that all is on the line. And so again, I think that it's this weird, well, we know why, right? Trump only cares about his kind of donors and himself.
Hmm.
But it's distorting the entire economy. Again, we used to talk about jobs versus the environment. Well, now all the good new jobs are in the environment. It's in clean tech, it's in clean energy. And so the attacks on that just hurt the overall economy and hurt our prospects of creating more opportunities for people.
Yeah, there are a lot of very, very well-paying jobs available as a result of the investment in offshore wind, as a matter of fact. I had the privilege of working for Congressman Jim Florio back when he was in the House. I was his chief of staff for 2 years during the time that he was working on the Superfund
Mhm.
legislation. And I was very proud of that. And Congressman Florio was a co-host of my podcast for a little while before he passed away not long ago. Uh, but he was very, very high on the offshore wind um, activities that were taking place off the coast of New Jersey. And I just hope that can continue for sure.
Hmm.
Now, have you got any closing thoughts? You got anything else you want to add about all of this?
No, I think this has been great. I mean, look, I'd just say I've had the privilege of kicking around the climate movement for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
working on a lot of different efforts from the Keystone XL pipeline to clean energy to fossil fuel divestment. I think that this push to make polluters pay with the lawsuits that are underway, suing big oil with these Superfund bills that are moving, this provides one of our best avenues to finally breaking the power of this industry that's been holding back political progress and warping our democracy, as we're seeing with Trump. And so uh, we've just gotten this campaign up and running. It's just beginning. People can get in at the ground floor. We just launched a new website, makepolluterspay.net, that
Okay.
people can check out. And we'd love for people to get involved because, again, every city and state across this country is feeling the impacts right now. And so there's nothing stopping your city council or your district attorney or attorney general from going up and holding big oil accountable. So we're trying to build that movement around the country. It's exciting to see it take off. It's exciting to already have a big win with little old Vermont, but it won't stop there if we all get organized around it.
How can people get involved with what you guys are doing?
So makepolluterspay.net is the
Mhm.
great place to sign up. There's a big sign up form right there, and we'll
Okay.
keep you involved and plug you in.
Mhm.
And then, that's the best place to start. Then there's lots of other information online and social media. And if you start Googling around, you'll find different pieces of it. But we would love for people to get involved. And the final thing I'd say is just keep talking to your neighbors. I deal in communications, and the best social science says that lots of people actually care about climate and clean energy, but they need to hear about it. They need to
Yeah.
know that Bob's saving money on his electric vehicle, and your neighbors are getting solar, and that people want to see these benefits continue. So the more that we can talk about it, again, you don't even have to mention climate change or global warming. Just talking
Right.
to people about the extreme weather, the heat that's happening, and the money you're saving with clean energy, that stuff begins to have an impact, and those conversations really matter.
All right. Well, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate you being with us on the Lean to the Left podcast. It's a very, very important topic, and I thought you did a great job, and I appreciate it very much. Thank
You
you.
bet. Well, thanks for having me.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and that you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now, it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1. Instagram at Lean to the Left 1. TikTok at Lean to the Left. LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy. And YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.